We begin tonight with the January 6th committee investigation. A key ally of former President Trump is now saying he's willing to testify to the committee. Former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon says he would testify in public after not complying with a subpoena from the committee. A trial stemming from his refusal to comply with the subpoena is set to start in the coming days. And at the White House today, President Biden touted the recent passage of the bipartisan gun control bill. He said the legislation, after nearly 3 decades of inaction on Capitol Hill, will pave the way for lawmakers to pass more regulations on firearms. For more on this and the day's top political stories, let's bring in Christina Ruffini and Siobhan Hughes. Christina is a CBS News correspondent, and Siobhan is a Capitol Hill reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Christina, I want to start with you. President Biden today touted the passage of the bipartisan gun control legislation today, but there have been a number of mass shootings since he signed that bill into law last month. What other measures is the president calling on Congress to pass?
Well, Nicole, you were there for the ceremony. As you know, he was interrupted at one point by a protester who's a father of a child who was killed in one of these incidents, and he was urging the president to do more. And the president said, you're right, we do need to do more. He said he does support a ban on assault weapons. He supports a limit on high-capacity magazines, and he thinks that people should be held responsible. If they have weapons, if they have guns that they don't secure, and those weapons are then used to kill people, he thinks they should be culpable for that act. But the mood today was celebratory, which some people disagreed with and some people didn't. But in this gridlocked Congress that we've got in this sharply divided Senate, it was an accomplishment to be able to get anything done. The question is it enough, and will it really have an impact on these mass shootings and the violence that we're seeing across the country?
Christina, the president said he's considering declaring a public health emergency to increase abortion access. Is the White House expected to actually make this declaration, and which recourses would be available if they did?
It sounds like they're backing away from that a little bit. The president this weekend was asked about it while he was on a bike ride in Rehoboth, and he said it's something we're looking at. At the briefing today, the spokeswoman said, you know, it's on the table. All options are on the table. But when they really started to dig into what that power is, it doesn't seem like it's going to be able to enable them to do a lot. And that's the problem with this issue in general. You look, the power of the executive is very limited on issues like this. And any of these measures they take that do have an impact, you have to imagine states that want to ban abortion will then counter with laws that will then probably get appealed or sued against, and it'll go right back up to the Supreme Court. So again and again, the White House has said the best recourse for this is to vote in pro-abortion rights advocates into Congress and to codify Roe v. Wade in federal law, federal abortion rights protections that come through the U.S. Congress, because as we all learned from Schoolhouse Rock, that's where the laws get made.
Good point there. Well, Siobhan, the House is planning to vote this week on 2 measures that would expand abortion access. Walk us through what are in these measures and if they have a chance to pass in the Senate.
So there are 2 different bills. One is called the Women's Health Protection Act. This is a reprise of a bill that already came up on the House floor and passed, but stalled out in the Senate. What this would do is say that on a national basis, women are entitled to an abortion up until the point of viability and after, if necessary. With viability, the determination of the doctor, the medical professor, not the state. And that is something that Republicans are not going to accept. In fact, they have not accepted it, but Democrats need to show they are doing something for their base. The second bill is more narrowly targeted, and the central thrust of it would be to prevent states from taking punitive action that could stop a woman from going to another state to get an abortion. This is the issue of crossing state lines. It's something that Nancy Pelosi had said was on the table. It's something that Joe Biden had been encouraging. And so it's unclear whether this would actually get a vote in the Senate, but this is much more narrowly tailored.
And Siobhan, I want to ask you a couple questions now about the January 6th committee. Former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon says that he is willing to testify now. What do we know about if the committee will actually bring him in for testimony?
Well, over the weekend, Jamie Raskin, one of the committee members, didn't shut the door on it. He said the committee certainly likes to hear from everybody, but there could be some caveats in here. For example, in the letter that Mr. Bannon's lawyer sent over to the committee, he said that Mr. Bannon would prefer to testify in public. This is something that the committee has not allowed people to do. It's something that could give a Trump ally a platform to espouse his or her views. And also it's something that makes it much harder for investigators who are able to have a lot more credibility with witnesses if they keep the information close to their chests. So the conditions are unclear. Whether or not this is a stunt is unclear. It is clear that Mr. Bannon, should he choose to be forthright, could be very, very revealing. He was, for example, at the Willard Hotel on January 5th, right before January 6th, when there was the effort to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the election, essentially by either stopping the account or forcing it to go back to the states. Let's add on to this, too. We also don't know if Mr. Bannon, upon going in to testify, would decide to take the fifth.
Yeah, and obviously another key figure was former White House counsel Pat Cipollone. He testified to the committee behind closed doors for 8 hours on Friday. Committee member Jamie Raskin said on Face the Nation yesterday that testimony was valuable.
We are going to get to use a lot of Mr. Cipollone's testimony to corroborate other things we've learned along the way. He was the White House counsel at the time. He was aware of every major move, I think, that Donald Trump was making to try to overthrow the 2020 election and essentially seize the presidency. And so I considered his testimony valuable.
Could we see portions of Cipollone's testimony at tomorrow's hearing or any other hearings going forward? What are you hearing?
It seems highly likely at tomorrow's hearing, and that's because of the substance that will be the focus. We're going to learn the backstory behind the December 19th tweet that President Trump made, "Be there, will be wild," because on December 18th, a group of people, including the lawyer Sidney Powell, Michael Flynn, President Trump's first national security advisor, essentially broke into the White House and finagled a meeting with Mr. Trump in which they discussed how the election count could be stopped in the pathway to overturning the election. And according to an account provided by a person who was there named Patrick Byrne, Mr. Cipollone at one point participated in that meeting, essentially trying to stop a lot of these ideas from progressing. But Mr. Cipollone would be a firsthand witness to that conversation, and which sort of sets the stage for the substance of what they want to talk about, the luring, the siren call to people to come to the Capitol, and that effort to really rev up the Trump base.
And then, Christina, President Biden, as you know, is set to visit the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia this week. What's on the agenda for this trip?
Right. Well, first he's going to go to Israel, where he hasn't been yet as president, but has been before as vice president and in previous roles. He's going to reassure America's ally that, you know, our solidarity with that country transcends parties and administrations. As you might remember, the last administration was particularly close to the then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's no longer in power. They're having a bit of a shuffle there once again. So the president is going to go and, you know, do what every president does, which is visit Israel and reassure them that, you know, America has their back. Then the president is going to Saudi Arabia, and this is particularly, we're going to go ahead and say the word controversial, because on the campaign trail, President Biden said it should be treated as a pariah nation after the killing and dismembering of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi in a Saudi consulate in Turkey. You know, he said all these things, but when the rubber meets the road, this war between Russia and Ukraine has caused a massive oil and gas spike in prices across the world, as we know, and the Biden administration needs to show that it's doing everything it can to potentially bring those prices down, even going to countries like Saudi Arabia. Now, today, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan held a briefing where he used the word human rights multiple times and tried to emphasize that, look, the U.S. can do both. It can stand up for human rights and it can make these strategic partnerships. The president had the byline on an op-ed in the Washington Post this week where he said, in order for America to push back against Russia and compete with China, we need strategic allies like Saudi Arabia. He understood that not everybody supported his trip, but it was important for America's national security interests that they go and that we have a relationship with the kingdom. Now, other colleagues of mine asked today if the president will be on camera shaking hands with Mohammed bin Salman, who you might remember, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who U.S. intelligence reports say was responsible for that killing. And Sullivan didn't quite answer and said he didn't know the ins and outs and wasn't sure exactly what would happen. So we'll have to see if we get a handshake on camera between those two men. But as we said this weekend, it just goes to show that no matter what the aspirations of each of these administrations is, they always come in saying we're going to do better, we're going to uphold human rights. But in a crisis, it's those strategic interests that really bear the brunt and that end up getting priority. And that's something we're seeing with the president's trip to Saudi.
Well, Christina, Ruffini, and Siobhan Hughes, it's going to be a busy week. Thanks very much.